to the UN Global Compact Academy. I'm Judy Njino, Executive Director of Global Compact Network Kenya. I'm excited to welcome you back to our Academy Changemaker series. With this series, we want to help you learn directly from some of the most innovative and influential people around the world. Our guest today is Group Managing Director at Sasini PLC, an East African company that grows, produces, markets, and exports tea, coffee, avocado, and macadamia nuts. Martin's career spans over 25 years of experience in international trade, business management, and leadership in industry-leading global organizations, driving efforts in his professional and personal capacity. I also thank him for his service and leadership as board chair at Global Compact Network Kenya. Our guest is Martin Ochien'g, Group Managing Director, Sasini PLC. Martin, tell us, what does gender equality mean to you, and where does your motivation to drive this come from?
So thank you very much, first of all, for hosting me and having me part of this Changemaker series. It's really humbling. And you ask where my journey starts. It's a long one, and I don't want to go through the detail. But basically, my background is very diverse, and it's littered with experiences infused from both male and female interactions. I grew up in a household of ladies, 4 siblings, so I'm the only son and 3 daughters to my parents. And what that taught me very early on in life, and my dad was very strong with this lesson, was that we got to treat your sisters the same way you expect to be treated. And that was so entrenched in me, in my upbringing, that I grew up not seeing the difference between myself and my sisters. And so when I got into the working space, that naturally progressed into the way I related with my female colleagues.
Is there a concrete moment or experience you had as a business leader that made it clear to you that a focus on gender equality was critical to long-term business success?
There are many experiences. I mean, I could name a couple, but let me give you one from the very early stages of my career. I worked at a company, an American pharmaceutical company. It's one of the very first companies I joined when I left the university. And when I joined, it was a full male team. I thought that was a bit strange. And then I started seeing doctors and pharmacists and nurses to promote the medicines that 3M were promoting in the market at the time. And in doing that, I met my competitors and medical reps from other organizations, and I noticed that they were all men. This is in the early 90s, and I asked myself why. And the reason for that was because it was a heavy traveling job. You had to be out of town a lot. A lot of the recruiting managers at the time thought that it wasn't a suitable job for ladies. And I thought that was really not a good reason not to have ladies, in those teams. And so I made a vow to myself that one day when I become a recruiting manager or a manager of such a team, I would try and change that. Luckily for me, by the time I got to management level 3-4 years later, that narrative had started changing. We saw ladies being infused into the sales teams of these medical and pharmaceutical companies. And in actual sense, in my personal view, they performed better than the male that got those opportunities. And so it's just wanting to correct this situation that was very different from the situation I had when I was growing up. That motivated me to think differently.
Oh, that's good to hear. Now, Martin, we at the UN Global Compact were excited to be with you and Sasini PLC on parts of this journey towards gender equality. Sasini was one of our inaugural participants for the Target Gender Equality Accelerator program. And since then, Sasini has set ambitious targets for gender equality and actually made significant progress towards them. So for the benefit of our participants, what are your current targets for gender equality? And then how do you go about narrowing down your ambitions into concrete and measurable targets?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So I joined Sasini in March of 2019. What I found was not dissimilar from what I was describing previously, where the organization was male-dominated, right from the leadership level all the way to the shop floor. And the reason for that is being an agricultural business, the leadership of all of these businesses tend to be male from years gone by. You find ladies, but they're generally, focused on being in the field, picking tea or picking coffee or tilling the land. You rarely see ladies in high management positions. And so it struck me as odd, having worked internationally, driving this agenda, living setups where that balance was 50-50, in some cases 60-40, more skewed to the ladies' side, that I would find a situation where in my leadership team, the lady component was less than 10%. And so I set out very quickly to say we got to change this and give opportunities to more ladies to join the executive level. We were lucky that we had vacancies and opportunities to do that. At that point, when we joined the Target Gender Equality Program, we set a target of 40% of our leadership team being female. We are currently sitting at 39%, 2.5 years later after setting that target. But we didn't leave it there. We set a target of 40% of the whole organization across all levels. We are doing slightly worse there at about 30%. We have another year in our estimation to 18 months to reach there. The way you achieve that is to have a very focused drive for recruitment. Often you hear human resource talent telling you, oh, we looked for ladies in this job and we didn't find proper skills, and so here are the candidates and they're all men. So we've refused to do that, and we at certain levels have put a moratorium on, if you're not going to consider lady personnel, you have to get approval from the top office to say go and employ a male counterpart, and that has helped us to drive deliberately this agenda. We think we'll hit the 40% sometime later this year, and then it will be time to set new targets. And my goal is to have an equitable organization where everybody, in terms of opportunities, shares that at 50-50%.
And Martin, and that's why it's so important to be intentional around target setting for gender equality. But Sasini, went beyond looking at, executive leadership representation to ensure that women are represented at that level. But you went a step further to also look at other levels of the business. Why was it important to do this? Why didn't you just stick to executive management, has been traditional for many companies? Because
it's got to be entrenched. It's going to become a culture of the organization. And so one day when I'm not here, I don't want that philosophy to die. And so I also don't want it to be linked to me, that Martin is the one who's driving this agenda. For you to avoid that, one, you've got to make it something that is systemic in the business. That everybody who comes into any leadership role in our business understands that we need about half their teams to be female. But traditionally, to address that imbalance from the past, you have to be deliberate. And you have to be deliberate across the whole organization. So everybody from a junior manager to an executive knows that my recruitment strategy and plan must include consideration for female in an equal measure to the same consideration I'm giving men. And that is why we drive it across the whole organization.
Transformation is easy to talk about, but hard to do, especially in leadership. Have you experienced any pushback?
Of course, you'll find people who may not buy into the idea at first. I must say I've been very lucky. I believe in a mantra of leadership called co-leadership. I don't lead alone. I've never led alone. And so that co-leadership means that you have a core group of people that you lead with in different scenarios. And for you to get that core group of people, they've got to share your philosophy. They've got to share your approach to business, and more importantly, your approach to leadership. And so once you get that core, you'll be aligned. And if not, you'll try as much as possible to align them. And once that alignment comes, the resistance is removed from it. And so what then happens is they take your message down their organization through their own department and their own divisions. In previous businesses, yes, I have had different sorts of resistance, one to gender, even to things like, race and color, but you overcome those by being very stringent and being very consistent with your message and showing genuinely that you really care about that passionately. And so in Sasini, I wouldn't say there's been any resistance. In fact, the exact opposite has been the case. We've gotten very good support, which is the reason why we're approaching our targets very quickly. And so we're going to set new, more aggressive targets as we achieve those. And this comes right all the way from the board. Our board composition is at 35% female. And so if we keep going like that every time we get opportunities to replace those deliberately with ladies, we're going to achieve what we want. And it will become systemic, then becomes a culture of the organization.
Yeah, you bring an important point around bringing everybody along. And that as a business leader, you can't do it by yourself. And so when you're looking at issues around, again, representation, how do you ensure that these women that you're working very actively to ensure that they're represented and their voices are heard. How do you ensure that they're also capacitated to play their part once they have this opportunity?
I think what's critical is not to promote women for the purpose of promoting women. The first thing you look for in a role or in a talent is the skill to do that job. You don't go and say, I want a lady for this job. I want the right skill for this job. And then the second level is to say, I'd like that skill to be in a lady because I want to promote that agenda. And so if we find, for example, that you're recruiting for talent and you've got a lady and a gentleman with the same skill, the same ability, and more importantly, the same potential, because that's what you recruit for, we tend to go with the lady because we are promoting this agenda. And then once they are in, we are very focused on making sure they are trained, they are upskilled to get to the levels that they need to be. When they're in the leadership positions, we give them the voice and we give them the decisive power to be able to lead their teams, and that is really critical. Otherwise, you're giving it lip service. You can't give people responsibilities just so that there's a window dressing that you have women in your team. They've got to be people who have decisive power to be able to lead those teams the way you want them to. We are very good at that, and so we give them a voice. We also insist in our meetings that the participation in terms of contribution is generic, and so we don't necessarily allow ladies to keep quiet, especially in group settings, is to keep quiet and let the men dominate the room. And so we become very good in facilitating women participation in our discussions. And over the years, we've seen a lot of that strength coming through. And we see a lot of our leaders from the female side taking charge as well.
So Martin, how do you communicate that gender equality benefits everyone, including men who might perceive that this is a women's, agenda only?
By being consistent with your messaging, but also rewarding the women who are successful in their roles loudly. But you have to do that carefully while not taking care not to diminish the effort that the men put in the system. In my view, skill has no gender. You can't tell me that a male person could drive a tractor better than a female. The ability is the same. There might be things that men could do physically that women may struggle with. But we are seeing with technology, those things are less and less important. And so what we do in Sasini is we've gotten to a point now, and I'm very happy about that, where it is not anymore frowned at. It is part of our culture. So the way you ensure that that message is entrenched is being consistent. And not just with the messaging, but with your actions as well. So if you keep doing that, it becomes part of the culture.
Looking at your experience across different countries in the globe and industries, including some of which are very, male-dominated, including the pharmaceutical one that you just talked about, are there specific lessons that you learned that you believe could be applied everywhere?
I'm sure there are, and there are many. It's just difficult to pinpoint some. I've been led by both men and women in my career. So I have served in pharmaceutical industry. I've served in the alcoholic beverages industry, in the marketing roles, and I've served in service industries with subscriber businesses. I'm now serving in agriculture. If you look at those businesses, they're all predominantly male-dominated. And so what I looked for was, where's the difference between the people who lead me? Who do I admire? And I would say out of 10 people who've led me in my career, I've only had one lady leading me. The lessons I picked from the ladies were very similar to the lessons I picked from my mother and from my sisters growing up. And I found a lot more emotional connection to those lessons. And so I think that if you have the right person with the right skill, you get better results, you get better leadership. So, like you were talking about resistance earlier, it's harder. And the reason it's harder is because the men don't want to give up that privilege. And in some cases, they don't even understand that they're privileged. And so it's silent in their minds because they don't see it. And so you, who's very positive in advancing female folk and female equity, is seen as somebody who's just depressing men, which is not the case. And so I tend to, praise openly, criticize privately, both genders. I lead in different ways depending on the situation. There are some situations where you need to lead from the front. There are other situations where you need to lead from the middle with the people and be with them doing the work. There are other situations where you stay in the back and let somebody lead you. In those situations where I need to stay at the back, I usually push a lady in front, and they do very well. And so when that example is seen, one, by the men, they then trust the lady to lead, but two, by the women, they then trust themselves to be able to emulate that and to do the same when they get the opportunity. It's really, really important. Optics matter, but what matters more is the empowerment that you give the ladies.
Well, important. Now, we also know that no one person can change a system. And when we look at this issue of gender equality, we have a long history of women being left behind. What or who have been your most crucial allies for driving transformation?
Wow, that's a broad question. I've had leaders that, practiced gender equity without talking about it. I've had leaders that were very loud about it. I've had leaders that were opposed to it. And so what I've found is in each of those, there were positive and negative things, and it just depended on what I wanted to pick. So you always balance the things, and so that taught me to be balanced in my approach. Fast forward to when I came to Sasini, we were rolling out mechanization in the year 2020, mechanization of picking tea. So that's automating tea from picking it by hand to using machines, tractors, to actually pluck the tea. We have, at the moment, about 8 of those tractors. 6 of them are driven by ladies. And they do as much a good job as the guys do. And so, in my view, I do not see, and I believe this truly in my heart, I do not see any job where there's a difference or where you would prefer a man to a woman. And so in that case, when we do employ and we're looking for talent, we start with a balanced place, a balanced platform. You have the same opportunity that the men have.
Despite all your good efforts, what happens in the case that you don't meet your gender targets? Do you have a plan in place to anticipate potential backlash or change course?
We don't have that opportunity. We have to meet our targets. There's just no two ways around it. We don't set targets to miss them. We set targets to overachieve them. And in fact, the fact that we set this target 3 years ago and we've already met it is an exemplification of that fact. Yes, you will have hurdles along the way as you implement and as you sort of like get the organization to see your vision and to follow you. But those hurdles are there to make you stronger, not to derail you from the goal that you need to drive. We will meet those targets, and we are well on our way to meet those targets. What is more pleasing is as you meet these targets, your results are also following. There is a correlation. I don't think it's scientific, but there is a business correlation where success is related to the gender equity factor in businesses. So the more balanced you are, the more successful you tend to be, especially in this world. And we are getting kids out of the universities now that coming out with 2 degrees, 3 degrees at a time. And if you don't give your daughters the same chances you're giving your sons, what are you doing for the future? And so we don't have an opportunity to miss those targets.
Now, you, Martin, have been a very strong champion for gender equality, and it's quite evident in the work that you've done at Sasini. Now, what do you think needs to be done to bring other men, other business leaders in this journey, and me are talking, to get other men in positions such as yours?
I think we need to continue doing what we're already doing, which is sensitization and talking about equity in the workplace. But more importantly, and I think this is where social engineering aspects come in, there needs to be equity in the social space as well, because you can't do something different at work from what you do in your social setting. And so if we don't get more men starting to see their sisters and their daughters and their wives the same in terms of rights to them, you're going to struggle with this. I'm glad to say if you measure that today, you'll find there are more men who believe in this than 20 years ago. And so we have to be progressive and we have to drive the agenda strongly, but we also have to be patient. It's been centuries of male dominance right from prehistoric days. You're not going to change that overnight. But what is critical is that we get strong leaders that believe in this mantra and drive that mantra and that message very strongly. Also, be brave enough to give opportunities where they exist to women to lead. I always say in my organization, when you get that opportunity, do not let this philosophy down, because what you do by not performing is then giving voice to those who oppose it. And so you have to be very careful that, one, you promote skillfully, but you promote competently as well. And for us to get more men to believe in this, we have to have more ladies leading competently and not letting the men who give them the opportunities or the organizations that give them the opportunities to do so. I don't consider myself a male leader. I'm just a leader.
You do raise an important point in this gender equality discourse, that we really need to move beyond tokenism, and we've, I think, gone beyond just trying to advocate for women to take positions for the sake of. We need competent women, and they are there, and I think you've confirmed that even at Sasini PLC. Now, looking forward, in order to create a future that works for everyone, it's important that leaders take inspiration from across industries and generations. In all our Changemaker sessions, we like to end with a lightning round on future leadership. Now, Martin, for each question I will ask you, I want you to just say the first thing that comes to mind. Okay. Are you ready? Yeah. All right. So what other leader, past or present, do you take inspiration from?
Oh, there are many. Nelson Mandela, I met him once. He was genuinely focused on female leadership. Generally, his leadership was perfect. And I think when you saw it on TV or in print or in the way he was as a leader, you didn't see all of it. If you were in his presence and you saw the way he handled the female members of his team, you really admired that. And that really inspired him. But he was marvelous, really was. Most men will say my mother, because your mother is the first female figure in your life. And I would add on to that voice, because she remains a very strong driving factor for me. And she reminded me from when I was able to speak to consider my sisters the same way I consider myself.
Good choices. Now, young people bring a special perspective on the future because they're the ones who will be living in it. As a leader, what is the one piece of advice you would give to young professionals whose voices don't always get equal attention?
Keep talking, keep voicing, keep that voice up. The one thing about young people that is really admirable is they're not shy. I mean, we grew up, I don't know about you, but I grew up in a setting where I spoke when I was allowed to speak, not when I needed to speak. And so that meant that at times I didn't speak up because I wasn't allowed to speak. Young people don't have that. They speak their mind. I look at my daughter today at 26. She'll say what she needs to say when she needs to say it. And I think that's a very good trait, because then it allows them to portray their message. It allows them not to be cowed by people who are telling them they can't. And so they stay positive. I would say to them, keep doing that. Keep talking and keep saying what you must say when you need to say it. Don't be shy that you belong to a certain group of people or a certain class, or this is not my level. Keep talking. And I think that you're seeing expression from young people being very strong because they don't believe in being cowed and being silenced. And this you're seeing in the workspace. Those of us who are managing millennials and Gen Z generation now, in the environment space, people who are leading that fight are young people. In the political space, the people who are voting with their feet are young people. Why? Because that's a form of expressing themselves. And I think that's what I would encourage. Keep doing that.
Yeah. Absolutely. And yeah, as you've rightly noted, we are seeing this generation finding their voice and really being at the forefront in championing for the different changes that we want to see, be it in the climate emergency that we are currently experiencing. And I believe as business leaders, we can only encourage them, to be more active and to raise their voice across different issues in the business. So back to basics, Martin. What are the 3 most important characteristics leaders need to create change in today's and tomorrow's world?
I'll answer it with what are the 3 most important things for me as a leader, and what do I do? My job is fairly simple. Yes, you're the group CEO and you lead a big organization, and obviously there's a lot of weight on your shoulders to drive for results, to motivate the organization, and keep doing that going forward, set the strategy, set the vision, and drive that. But I do 3 things. First of all is I'm very decisive. And so my mantra is, if you walk into my office with a problem, you must bring several solutions. I'll help you to make the decision. I'll never give you the solutions, because you need to have considered what you can do to solve this problem. And so if you want me to help you with the decision, fine. If you can make the decision yourself, please go ahead and do so. And allowing people to do that is a way of developing them as well. So the first trait is decisiveness. You're better off making a wrong decision, you can change it. than being indecisive and procrastinating, because then you're wasting time, you're losing opportunities, and nobody's waiting for you. And so be fast with those decisions. If they're wrong, change them, but be decisive. So that's the first trait. The second one is competent delegation. You can't do everything yourself, like I said earlier. And as a leader, you need co-leaders with you. For you to do that, you've got to be able to live out some of the skills you've got to other people to do that and to help you with. And I find that when I co-lead, a lot of people in their areas of competence are better leaders and better skilled people than I am in those areas, and that helps me in my job. I learn from them, and so I also encourage them to competently delegate downwards. The reason I add the word competently there is delegation for the sake of delegation is meaningless. You've got to delegate to somebody who can then properly do that job. And the last one is engagement. It's just being present, being able to meet people, getting to know who they are at personal level, at professional level. That personal empathy allows you to connect to people, because leadership can be very lonely, especially if you're on the top of the organization. And you can become isolated with people thinking we can't go to the CEO's office and we can't go to the group MD's office. And so you demystify that by going into the organization, rolling up your sleeves and helping to do what is done even at the shop floor level. So I would say decision making, competent delegation, and engagement.
Thank you, Martin, for sharing your personal perspectives and insights with our audience today. And thank you to our participants for joining us today. I hope you have enjoyed it as much as I did. As we wrap up this Academy Changemaker series, allow me to share a few reflections from my conversation with Martin Ochien'g. One, as businesses, we need more male allies for championing gender equality within our different spheres of leadership. Two, for companies that are setting targets, it's important to be intentional and staying accountable for the targets we set. And three, we need to overcome pushback by staying consistent in our gender equality efforts and making gender equality everybody's business. That's it for this Changemaker session. We look forward to seeing you again soon.